As the Texas Army bedded down for the night after the exciting events of April 20th, Houston had a lot to think about. Would his men fight? Would they be able to stand the test, as reckless and as undisciplined as they have often been described, against a real army? What if Santa Anna launched a night attack or early pre-dawn attack? What if anything went wrong? Houston knew that many of the men had little respect for him. He'd heard the grumblings, and he'd borne the outright disrespect and questionings of his decisions from his officers, making compromises when he could. Some considered him a coward, always retreating, never taking a stand. Sam Houston famously loved the Iliad and committed passages of Pope's translation to memory. As the good apostle wrote, only God and man himself know that man's true thinking. But we can wonder and contemplate, based on what we do know. Houston had been to war. He had distinguished himself in combat serving under Old Hickory Andrew Jackson, who was then President of the United States. Even then, as he commanded the Texas Army, he still bore the never completely healed wounds that he had suffered in his active service and rash bravery under Andrew Jackson. He no doubt contemplated and had been contemplating the violent ends and bloody combat experienced by the defenders of the Alamo, and the cold-blooded executions performed under the guise of false pretenses at Goliad, as some have presented it. And did he lend moments to remember the stories of death and glory etched into the heritage of Western civilization and his own memory by the words of the Greek poet? It's impossible to know, but if you spend a lifetime reading and rereading a book, that book becomes a part of you. For the Iliad is a book about death. Homer wrote, "Generations of men are like the leaves. In winter, winds blow them down to earth. But then, when spring season comes again, the budding wood grows more. And so with men, one generation grows, another dies away." Would this generation of unruly and rebellious Texians he commanded grow, or would it tomorrow die away as had the commands of Travis and Fannin? What would be his and their fate? Because Homer also knew about it, writing, "And fate, no one alive has ever escaped it, neither brave man nor coward. I tell you, it's born with us the day that we are born." Houston had tried to give the men some training. He had tried to instill some sense of discipline into them. Rain and mud and never enough food had made tempers high. He, by moving away from Santa Anna, constantly away, had sought a better option than defeat. But this damned weather had been no help. Was this the place? Would it be across the river? Santa Anna's men had faced the same challenges as his men had faced. Bad weather, poor supplies, and Santa Anna had become separated from his much larger main army group. They were on near equal terms, it appeared. What would the Mexicans do? Would they attack at dawn? There was much to ponder as he rested his head that night on a coil of artillery rope beneath a tree. Meanwhile, across the prairie, Santa Anna considered the same questions. Would an attack come with the rising sun or just before? He and his army had pushed far into Texian territory and was separated from the bulk of his army, for the first time facing a Texian force of comparative size to his own. When would his reinforcements arrive? What would the morning bring? Would the next day be the day he finally rid Mexico of these invaders and pirates? He also set pickets to watch and ordered his soldiers to rest in battle formations with weapons at the ready. Tired, it must have been difficult to sleep in battle formation with weapons in their hands. This had not happened during the campaign. They had always been at the advantage. Both men, Santa Anna and Sam Houston, had much to consider that night. And for both, after an exhausting night, the answer was anticlimactic. When the sun began to rise just before 6 a.m., nothing happened. There was no attack, and from Santa Anna's perspective, it probably appeared that Houston was once again afraid to face him. The Mexican camp was able to relax. And then something did happen at about 9:30 in the morning when Santa Anna's brother-in-law arrived. On the morning of April 21st, General Cos arrived with about 500 men. Now, Santa Anna had given orders for the best of the best to reinforce him, but most of them were raw recruits from San Luis and Saltillo. These men, exhausted by the fast march, were not the best of the best, but their arrival did give him a numerical advantage. They increased Santa Anna's strength to about 1,400, but they were tired and they were hungry, and they had not eaten in 24 hours. Colonel Delgado gives us a good description of the events in the Mexican camp. At daybreak on the 21st, His Excellency ordered a breastwork to be erected for the cannon. It was constructed with pack saddles, sacks of hard bread, baggage, etc. A trifling barricade of branches ran along its left and right. The camping ground of selection was in all respects against rules. Any youngster could have done better. We had the enemy on our right in a wood at long musket range. Our front, though level, exposed to the fire of the enemy, who could keep up with impunity from his sheltered position. Delgado also said our own troops had no space for maneuvering. We had in our rear a small grove reaching to the bay shore, which extended on our right as far as New Washington. What ground had we to retreat up in case of a reverse? From sad experience, I answer none. A few hours before the engagement, I submit to General Castrillon a few remarks on the subject suggested by my limited knowledge, but he answered, "What can I do, my friend? I know it well, but I cannot help it. You know that nothing avails here against the caprice, arbitrary will, and ignorance of that man." This was said in an impassioned voice and in close proximity to His Excellency's tent. At 9:00 a.m., General Cos came in with reinforcement of about 500 men. His arrival was greeted by the roll of drums and with joyful shouts. As it was represented to His Excellency that these men had not slept the night before, he instructed them to stack their arms, remove their accoutrement, and go to sleep quietly in the adjoining grove. End of quote by Delgado. So when Cos first arrived, Santa Anna apparently had become excited and was again ready to attack. He wanted to attack. Cos, brother-in-law to His Excellency, spoke with the commander and convinced him that the newly arrived men would not be of any benefit to him if they attacked immediately. They were allowed to rest as a result of this intervention. Cos set up camp to the north toward the marshes, and with no apparent sign of danger, they were allowed to sleep and get a much-needed rest. And the rest of the Mexican army, after a stressful night readying for combat, also relaxed. No officer ordered sentries to keep watch, which is odd, and Santa Anna relaxed in his tent while soldiers throughout the camp ate, rested, and played cards. Now, on the other side of the field, after the arrival of Cos and his men, Deaf Smith, either at Houston's order or with Houston's approval of Smith's suggestion, proceeded to destroy the bridge that the Mexican army had used to reach the area, Vince's Bridge. If things went right, the Mexican army would be trapped and could no longer be reinforced. If things went wrong, it would be the Texans stuck in a snare. But it was a gamble. It's a game that they were playing, trying to make the right move. And Smith and a small party carefully traveled the 8 miles to do their work of destruction and make a safe return to camp in time to join in on the attack. Many years later, in 1858, in a letter, young Perry Alsbury shared his memory of this event. And he wrote, "On the morning of the 21st of April, 1836, Captain Carnes's cavalry company, commonly called Deaf Smith's Spy Company, were drawn up in line on the edge of General Houston's position, as well as I recollect. We were between 30 and 40 strong. the Mexican cavalry, whom we fought the evening before, at that moment were drawn up in line on the south of our position, about 600 yards distant. I think they were from 60 to 80 strong. They seemed to invite us again to combat, but prudence, in my humble opinion, dictated to our leaders a different course than to engage them at that moment. While sitting in our saddles, John Coker, my left file leader, made the following remark and the suggestions following. Boys, before many hours we will have one of the damnedest, bloodiest fights that ever was fought, and I believe it would be a good plan to go and burn that bridge so as not only to impede the advanced reinforcements of the enemy, but it will cut off all chance of retreat of either party. The proposition was seconded by the whole company when Deaf Smith proposed to go and see the general and get his approval to the enterprise. Word for word of what passed between our leaders I am not able to repeat, except that Smith told us Houston asked him, "Can you do it without being cut to pieces by the Mexican cavalry?" Smith said that he replied to Houston, "Give me 6 men and I will try." On Smith's return to our little party, he stopped about the center, facing us, and in the saddle some questions were asked him, as, "What did the general say?" He made no answer then, but after surveying us from right to left with an iron-like countenance, he said, "I want 6 men. I am going to burn the bridge. I want 6 men who are willing to follow me through or perish in the attempt." There was silence for several moments as 6 of us dropped out of the little line and volunteered to follow our favorite chief. But let me here do justice to the remainder of our companions in arms by saying and believing what I say, that there were scarcely a man of our spy company who would not have volunteered to follow Deaf Smith had each and all been well mounted. I will here mention the names of all who joined Deaf Smith in the enterprise, yet before doing so beg leave to state that I differ from the opinion of my old friend, Uncle Jack Coker, as we called him, as to the name of one of the party, but having the most implicit confidence in Uncle Jack's honesty, I am willing to risk his statement and give the names as he has set them down. Deaf Smith, Denmore Bives, John Coker, Y.P. Alsbury, Rainwater, John Garner, Lapham, 7 in all. We were compelled to pass within gunshot of the extreme left of the Mexican cavalry, who were drawn out, as stated, with their left wing reaching within gunshot of Buffalo Bayou, up which we had to go to reach the bridge, situated some 8 or 9 miles on the road leading to the Brazos. It being understood that we would maneuver so as to pass the Mexican horse, if possible, without a fight, the remainder of our company followed slowly, under a soldier's pledge that were we attacked by the cavalry, they would come to our assistance. Our main body maneuvered with the feint of an engagement, so that we passed to the rear, unmolested some distance when our comrades regained the camp, leaving the enemy to enjoy the belief that we were too cowardly to fight. We moved rapidly till reaching the mouth of the lane, on the north side of which was situated the double log house before occupied by Mr. Vince. We filed off to the left so as to avoid an ambuscade, should the enemy be concealed within the dwelling. We threw down the fence where it joined Vince's bayou, over which the bridge was built. 150 yards more, and we were at the bridge, over which Deaf Smith and myself passed with the view of reconnoitering, leaving the remainder of our party to strike fire and make the necessary preparations for burning the bridge on our return. We had gone about a half mile when we noticed in the sandy soil the track of a carriage wheel. Smith, with a countenance of mixed rage and disappointment, exclaimed, "Santa Anna has made his escape. Here is his carriage track, going back, pulled by mules in great hurry." I proposed to him that we should gallop on about 1 mile to a difficult crossing of another bayou where we might get the honor of helping him to cross. He replied, "My orders are to burn the bridge and return as quick as possible." In a few minutes we were at the bridge, where we found our comrades prepared the fire and plenty of dry rails and wood. In a few minutes the bridge was in flames. If I recollect aright, it was built of cedar, Nothing of interest occurred till we reached the first deep dry hollow, half or 3/4 of a mile above our camp, when an incident happened which goes to illustrate strongly the extraordinary sagacity of that masterly man, Deaf Smith. After ordering a halt, he observed, "I will ride up to the high ground next to camp, far enough to see whether any of the Mexican horsemen are near, so that we may avoid them." Our eyes were bent on our leader, as we suddenly saw him drop down on the mane of his horse and turn toward us. When up to us, the question was asked, "What news?" When, with an eye and a countenance I shall never forget, he said, "The prairie is filled with Mexican horse. I cannot see how or where they got their reinforcements from." Eyeing every man with the eye of a tiger, he asked, "What shall we do?" We told him, "You are our leader, and we shall follow you. Let your course be forward or back. My orders are to return to camp. I will do it or die." But, eyeing every one of us with a scrutiny even painful, he said, "If there is one or more of you prefers making your escape, I now give you leave." We loved our leader almost as we did our country, and replied to him again, "Lead on, we follow." A change, I thought, then came over his countenance, as I discovered his terrible eye moistened with a tear. He asked, "Are your arms all right?" He then added, "We will go down the dry hollow to where it joins the bayou, and then, in Indian file, run to the level above, which will bring us in about 100 yards of the enemy's extreme left. When discovered by them, we will raise the Texan yell and charge at full speed through their lines. They will, no doubt, kill me, my bogs, but by God, I will make an opening for the rest of you to pass." Such was the plan, understood, and, sir, I have heard men say that they could meet such scenes with cool indifference, but, sir, they are braver than I profess to be, although I must say, and when I say it, do so with candor and truth, that not one of Smith's men would have preferred the risk of death, but rather than an ignominious, disgraceful desertion of the leader we all loved. But to conclude, when fairly on the level which commanded a partial view of both armies, we saw no Mexican cavalry, but knew from the hearty laugh of our leader that he had, as he boastingly said, put our fidelity to the test. For my part, I felt well satisfied that I had saved my credit for courage without having the work to do, and doubt not but my companions felt as I did. That ends his account of the burning of the Vince's Bridge. James Washington Winters also recalled the events of that morning. He remembered years later, he wrote, "The next morning, April 21st, a council of war was held. Sometime before noon, Houston passed around among the men gathered at the campfires and asked if we wanted to fight. We replied with a shout that we were most anxious to do so. Then Houston replied, 'Very well, get your dinners and I will lead you into the fight. And if you whip them, every one of you shall be a captain.' There had been so many split-ups and differences that Houston preferred the opinions of the men themselves, feeling that before hazarding battle, we must find whether they would enter the engagement with a will. For the men had marched so long without food or rest that perhaps they might not be physically prepared. I never heard orders given as to Vince's Bridge. I heard that Deaf Smith had asked permission to cut it down. I never heard that Vince's Bridge was mentioned in any address to the army or any prominence given to the fact that it had been destroyed." Okay, so after Cos arrived to reinforce Santa Anna, Adjutant General John Wharton offered words of encouragement up and down the line. He said that there was only one course of action: attack at once. Physician Nicholas Labadie, originally from Windsor, Ontario, claimed that Wharton said, "Boys, there is no other word today but fight, fight. Now is the time." As noon drew close, Wharton and Houston conversed. What was said is unknown, but it is reported that Houston's final sentence to Wharton was, "Fight and be damned." Houston then did something he had never done during his command of the Texas Army. He called a council of war with Colonels Edward Burleson and Sidney Sherman and Lieutenant Colonels Henry Millard, Alexander Somerville, and Joseph L. Bennett, and Major Lysander Wells. Secretary of War was also present at the Council of War. Houston asked, "Shall we attack the enemy in position or receive the attack on our own?" Rusk said, "To attack veteran troops with raw militia is a thing unheard of. To charge upon the enemy without bayonets in an open prairie has never been known. Our situation is strong. In it, we can whip all Mexico." Now, there's a record in the papers of the Texas Revolution that show the results of the Council of War. It's listed as if it's a vote. And it says Colonel Burleson, Colonel Sherman, Lieutenant Colonel Millard, Lieutenant Colonel Somerville were against fighting. Lieutenant Colonel Bennett and Major Wells were for fighting. And then it lists the votes and then said held about noon on the day of the battle. And on the opposite side of the paper, it says Council of War at San Jacinto, April 21st, 1836. So I think that the against fighting meant against attacking, for fighting, apparently from the Rusk's memory, was for attacking. And only two of them were for attacking, according to that record. And then it goes on and says, ordered Sherman on the 20th when he went out with the detachment not to bring on an engagement in any event. It is not true that Sherman got the officers to agree to support him. And despite the vote result in the council, at about noon on April 21st, Houston instructed his officers that the men must ready themselves for an attack. According to Weishart, Houston had decided to attack before the meeting. And according to the early comment that he had gone around to the actual men, if that is true, then he knew what the men wanted to do. He was taking stock of what the officers wanted to do. But when would the attack occur? George E. Rath provided the following memory of the events. And he said, sometime between 3 and 4 o'clock on the afternoon of the 21st, when everything seemed to be in quiet of suspense, I was moving about in front of a thicket on the top of the rise above our company, watching the Mexican camp, which could be overlooked from there. Colonel Burleson came galloping up alone. He had come along the line on the left of the regiment, riding somewhat away from the right, on a straight course to the camp, a little in advance of us, of what was called the Battalion of Regulars, about 100 men armed with muskets and bayonets. Burleson knew me familiarly. He said, George, you run down and tell your captain and the captains on the right to come up here instantly and meet me. Then he galloped on. I delivered the order, there being only 2 other captains in our ride, and was back immediately to the place myself. Within a few minutes, the captains and some of the lieutenants of the regiment were assembled there. If anyone besides myself, not a commissioned officer, was there, it was Kraft, the orderly sergeant of Billingsley's company. Burleson was back by the time they all got there, and dismounting, he addressed his officers in about these words. Gentlemen, I have called you together. Fight we must. The time is the question. Shall we attack instantly or in the morning? The officers of the other regiment are collected in council for the same purpose. After a pause, Captain M. Baker spoke, saying it was late in the day, the fight might be protracted, and moved that we attack at daylight, giving some other reasons and ideas. But his speech was short. No objections were made. His proposition was at once agreed to, and Burleson remounted and rode off in the direction of the other regiment. The officers dispersed, except Billingsley, my captain, and 3 or 4 who had sat down on the ground, and I continued to stand by, listening to what they had to say. In a few minutes, Burleson came dashing back to the place and said, Captains, parade your companies. The other regiment has decided to fight immediately. I don't want mine to be a minute behind. I have had occasion to tell this, which I have here repeated many times before when talking of the Battle of San Jacinto. I have never heard it disputed, but this consultation of officers has never been brought up to me in conversation by anyone else, nor have I found any allusion to such consultation in my reading of accounts of the battle. It indicated that the fight was brought about by the voice of the Army. General Houston has always been accredited with having absolute control without counsel or advice. I do not know whether he demanded the consultation or sanctioned it, but it shows that he, too, was undecided as to the course of action at the time. And this goes on to show you how there was several discrepancies in the later years and arguments about what actually even occurred. But like I said, it's a large group of people, and some people weren't aware of everything going on. Others had different memories of it. Just trying to do the best we can to parse out what did happen.
You are listening to Texas History Lessons, a slow walk through Texas history made in Texas by a Texan for everyone, everywhere.
Okay, there we are. We're going to end part 3 of the Battle of San Jacinto. And if you're tired of waiting for in between the episodes, you can go and listen to the entire thing as one long episode. I know that some people like to have shorter episodes, so I've broke it down into about 30-minute increments. And there you go. We are actually finally up to the battle. And we'll get to that in the next episode. Thanks for listening. Thanks to Derek McClendon for providing the theme music. We'll be back again with the actual account of the actual Battle of San Jacinto. And thanks. Be sure to share the show with friends, your history-loving friends. And if you're on YouTube listening to this or watching this, please subscribe and also share it. And your comments are always welcome. I do not claim to be an authority. I've done a lot of work on this, and I'm trying to figure it out. Basically, this is a good, hard-earned first draft that needs a lot of refinement and some details added to it. There's a lot of discrepancy, which is what you find when you're going through personal accounts, especially accounts that some were written 30 or 40 years after the event. Nobody's memory is completely perfect, except for some of you blessed few that have picture perfect memories, but I digress. Thanks for listening. We'll be back soon with the next episode. It's already recorded. Just go listen to the whole long one if you can endure that long of an episode. And take care of yourself. Take care of one another. Be kind. Adios.